darkness. Do you really know what racism is? Chances are you don't. What do you think of when you think of racism? Do you think segregation? Do you think slavery? Do you think the civil rights movement? What comes to mind? Do you think of the KKK? Do you think of a fight for freedom? Do you think of a lack of opportunity? Well, while those may all be synonymous with racism, people tend not to understand racism in its fullness and in its entirety. And that alone is preventing us from moving forward and becoming a more egalitarian society. As long as people do not understand what racism is, we will always be just addressing the symptoms. So, instead of addressing the symptoms of the problem, what is the actual problem? Well, I believe the key to solving the problem is, of course, understanding the problem. Problem solving 101. So, what is racism? One of my favorite definitions, it's very simple, it's 2 words, but it explains it so well, because this is what white people don't understand about racism, and this is what black people don't necessarily understand about racism. And this goes for all prejudices, by the way, so this could be applied to sexism, any sort of prejudice. A good definition of racism is power plus prejudice. Now that's really important, because what that means is everybody can be prejudiced, but only the empowered group can be racist. So that means black people, Hispanic people, Asians, we are actually incapable of being racist because we don't have the power to be racist. We might be prejudiced, but we are not racist. This is very important to understand, because the black kid on the street who tags a building, F the police, and all of us on the streets wearing no justice, no peace on our t-shirts, we aren't doing anything. We aren't changing anything. We continue to be frustrated, and yet that isn't actually addressing racism. A white person, however, in the interviewing room who doesn't like black people are actively preventing black people from getting a job, paying their bills, sending their kids to college, buying food for their children. That is racism. Allow me to elaborate further. That means that racism is institutionalized. That means racism is permeated throughout everything in our society. That means our country bleeds racism. We thrive on racism. Even though slavery has been abolished since 1865, we are still capitalizing on the slave labor and the slave economies of the past. Think about it. In 1865, the slaves were set free, and yet we were just supposed to wake up and know how to thrive in a Eurocentric society? Were we supposed to know how to read automatically? Were we supposed to just magically get jobs? People still had to hire us and set us up to be successful. That still has not happened yet. I mean, in school they teach you that after 1865 there were still problems because the South developed Jim Crow, because most black people didn't have any skills, so they ended up having to be sharecroppers, which was almost the same as being a slave. So, if you look at it just from that start, we are still behind. That is what racism is. So, if you want a more wide definition of racism specifically, what you have to understand about racism is that racism is institutionalized. It is the systemic oppression of a group of people. It has nothing to do with just basic, oh, you don't want us to eat in your restaurants. It's not just, oh, you can't drink from our water fountains. The civil rights movement was not black people asking white people to like us and to be our friends. Martin Luther King didn't march with all those people to say, hey, white people, like us. You know what? You don't have to like someone to respect them and to provide them with an opportunity. Their work speaks for themselves. So really, the civil rights movement is about demanding respect and giving us the equal opportunity that respect and that recognition of our full humanity commands. When we talk about addressing racism, we need to address specifically white attitudes towards people of color, and we also need to talk about the institutions in which our country is built around. Because at the end of the day, our school system, our hiring practices, even things that affect how you live your life. So social institutions. Think about real estate. A very interesting anecdotal. In my Sociology 101 class, or in my Foundations of Sociology class, my structure and inequality teacher told a really illuminating story. So she wanted to move into a black neighborhood. It was an apartment. It wasn't like a house, but she wanted to live in this apartment. She didn't go to the realtor in person. So she said she was going to move into the apartment. She wanted to buy it. And what the lady said was, you sound white. She was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, do you really want to live there? And she was like, yeah, I think I'll be fine. She was like, no, I think it's a bit dangerous. I don't think you should live there. And she was totally cool with it, but the lady would not let her move in because she was white. And, you know, if it would have been a black professor, they would have been fine with it, because even though that person is educated, they're professional in America, it would be assumed that they have the cultural capital to live in this environment. Whereas this white lady who's like, yeah, sure, I can live in this black neighborhood, and so it might be a little dangerous, I think I'll be fine. And the woman would not let her live in that neighborhood. Likewise, on the flip side of things, if you are a rich black person who wants to buy a house, a realtor will show you a different set of houses in maybe an all-black neighborhood. So, it is important to understand little things like that our country does to separate us out, one, and to prevent us from learning about each other, and thereby stop us from respecting each other and those differences that make us who we are, and lastly, enabling us to treat each other equally. All that stuff is still here. So, by and large, what people need to understand about racism is more than kids getting shot. That is a symptom of racism. What people need to understand is all that, hey, you can't eat here, that is just disrespectful. You know what? To this day, if you don't like someone in your business, if you think they look threatening, it just so happens that oftentimes those people are black kids or hoodlums, but private business owners have the right to deny people business. So at the end of the day, those are small potatoes. The real larger issue of racism is denying black people the opportunity to elevate in this society, to get that education, to get that house that they want, in the neighborhood they want, to be able to pass down generational wealth because our path to wealth is blocked. Those things, the structure and inequality aspect of it, that is what really is the bread and butter of racism. And that is what everyone needs to understand about racism. And this obviously does not just apply to black people. This applies to Asian people. This applies to Latino people. They just have different issues in terms of day-to-day microcosm sort of racist experiences. But by and large, it's the same thing. A lot of those small things are really annoying, but again, they are symptomatic of racism. So before you were in the dark about racism, and now hopefully you have seen the light.